So, hi, Shubham. First of all, congratulations on the massive 760 score with a Q50 and a V42. You must feel amazing, really. Tell us how you're feeling right now.
Well, I mean, it was very frustrating initially, a lot better now. So happy as usual.
And it's frustrating because, I mean, this is not even your second or third attempt. This is your fifth GMAT attempt where you really managed to get the score. Can you give our viewers kind of an overview of where you started out and what that journey looked like?
Yes, I remember starting at a 600 even before my GMAT actual exam through a
Mhm.
Sigma X mock. So yes, there is a 160-point improvement, but between that there were five or rather four actual GMAT attempts, which were at 680, 680 again, 660, 710, and then finally at 760 across a period of, let's say, 9 odd months. So it's been a rather frustrating one, but all's well that ends well.
All's well that ends well. So you actually came, though you took the first Sigma X mock and scored a 600, you actually came into e-GMAT only after that second 680 attempt, right? So how did you really find out about e-GMAT and what drew you in kind of to our course?
Most of e-GMATs, I would say popularity for me came through word of mouth itself. A lot of my friends had taken up e-GMAT and excelled at it. I remember a friend of mine who got a 740 and was recommending this to me even before I got a 680. But I think I was towards the end of my preparation, so I thought it might not be worth it.
Mhm.
Which is why I went to the standard preparation through, the OGs, the set of books that are existing. But yes, I do feel I should have come a lot a lot sooner. I would have saved a lot of money and maybe an effort as well.
No, I mean, better late than never, right? I think that's the real takeaway from here. So you joined after that second 680, where you were already at, I think, a Q50 and a V30, and you
Yes.
were mainly looking at us for verbal improvement. And you really did excel. A V42 is a 12-point improvement from where you started out when you joined the course. So how did the course and each individual subsection starting from master comprehension really help you in that journey to V42?
Yeah. I think even before, these exams, when I'd written the mock, I'd scored a V26.
Mhm.
And I would say moving from V26 to, V32, V33 isn't that big a deal, isn't that tough rather. You
Mhm.
can refer to the standard OG materials and get to that. The problem starts when you need to move from 30, mid 30 to, the early 40s. And I think that's where the structure of the course itself was brilliant. I had spoken to an e-GMAT expert as well, and they suggested, starting from master comprehension, moving to SC, then CR, then RC. And I think that entire flow, which came in through the personalized study plan as well, helped a lot. So I remember starting out at SC and immediately saw a massive improvement in terms of the way I was solving the harder questions, right? Because there was a very specific focus on the meaning based approach, which helped significantly improve, at least in the tougher questions. Even before that, I think I could easily eliminate 3 out of 5 options, get
Mhm.
stuck in 2 options which are always grammatically correct, and that's where I think meaning comes to your savior. And yeah, kudos to that. That was a really new approach despite referring to so many materials. Moving to CR, I think the entire concept of pre-thinking or p-paraphrasing helped significantly as well. Just guessing the range of answers which could be correct saves a lot more time. And I remember in my final attempt, there was a point where, let's say, the second option is the correct one. I didn't even have to read through the last three. I would never suggest anyone doing that, but that was the clarity which I had by just looking at the options, because I knew that's one of the range of answers which are going to be correct.
And I
In a,
think you had, sorry, I think you had also mentioned that CR was not something that you had sort of extensively prepared for your 680 attempts. So coming
Not at all.
into this
Yeah.
pre-thinking, I think, how did it really, you said you could stop at the second answer choice. So how did that really clarity become cemented in your head? How were you able to develop that approach fully?
I would say for a lot of my friends as well who are doing CR questions, it just feels that you might get it correct without even reading through the concept. Because at the end of the day, you're talking about strengthening, weakening sort of things. You don't really need to go dig into the concepts where you in the same way you would do for sentence correction, because there are a whole lot of grammatical rules. But I really liked the sort of flow which was there in CR, because they derived everything, or the e-GMAT course derived everything from assumptions, right? You talk about strengthen, which basically means strengthening the assumptions. Weakening means negating the assumptions. Evaluating means going both the sides of it. So these kind of things which are stemming from just one topic called assumptions was really nice. So you just needed to strengthen your assumption topic, and everything just fell in place after that. So that was something, probably it was something new for me, the way to approach these questions. And yeah, that was a game changer, I would say.
Mhm. And for RC, you had said a little bit about how this wasn't the first time you'd faced reading comprehension because you had prepared for competitive exams before this as well, right?
Yes, that's right.
So how did the RC course itself help you in that goal to getting to that V42?
um, I'd say a large part of the way e-GMAT's RC is structured is basically how I had prepared for my CAT exam as well. Focusing on sort of keywords such as however, but, nevertheless, watching out for, when the change in the main point occurs, figuring out the main point, tone, etc. These are the important caveats, and that's something which helped a lot. I think the bigger problem which I had faced was setting the pace while reading for RC. And across 5 attempts, I can say I've experimented in every sort of way possible, where I'd given one attempt where I'd, raced through the RC, and saw that that was probably not the best idea. What I figured out towards the end of it was, you don't none of the RC passages are ever tough to comprehend. Some of us have a habit of going through a lot of LSAT questions, which even I did, but they're never verbally, or they don't have a really tough verbose either. It's very simple sort of RCs. The problem comes in the set of questions which they ask. So one slow reading, one thorough reading is definitely the way to go, at least as per me. So yeah, and I think these are some of the strategies which I had seen through in a lot of the 760 strategy sessions as well. So that helped a lot too.
That's really well said. And that's actually the right approach. Reading things once, but reading them well, preventing rereading is going to one help you answer questions really quickly. But more than that, it's also going to prevent rereading. So I'm sure you didn't have to go back to the passage, which must have saved you time
Exactly.
overall in verbal, right? And how about Scholaranium? Because I know that you use the Scholaranium platform very extensively in your preparation with e-GMAT. So how did that piece really help you to refine and to cement, to master what you had learned in the modules?
And the reason why I'd used this exhaustively was also because more or less I'd used it exclusively as well. And the reason I'd used this exclusively was because of how good the analysis was in the Scholaranium as compared to the other platforms. I recall when I was, even going through OG, GMAT Club, or any other test taker site, the analysis bit of it was something where I'd spent about 2 or 3 minutes per question if I'd gotten it wrong. In Scholaranium, for even the right questions, I had spent about 10 minutes. And I think that was the key for me, analyzing the questions thoroughly, whether you get it right or wrong. Obviously, when you've got it wrong, you spend a lot more time on it, but spend more on it even if you've got it correctly, because you want to make sure that you've got it correct for the right reasons. And that's where Scholaranium stood out for me, because it just didn't have explanations for those 5 options, but there was a whole bunch of explanation existing even before jumping on to the answer choices, such as pre-thinking or the meanings-based approach, etc., which kind of stems the flow much better, I would say.
So that's really, really great, right? That you reviewed. What I really like is that you reviewed not just your incorrect options, where, as you said, you need to spend that time to understand why you got things wrong. But you also spend that time to understand that you got the question right for the right reason. And how do you think that review piece plays into that 760 score? Why is review such an important part of getting to a high score? And what do you think that students often fail to do?
Well, the first, I think, habit which all of us have is focusing on quantity over quality significantly, just because we want to make sure that we get that really high accuracy. Sorry. And it kind of spirals down rather badly, and you end up in an endless loop of solving or doing some sort of revenge solving, especially in CR, because by just looking at the correct option after you've got it wrong that you could have got that right. In SC there are areas where, let's say, you were not aware of the grammatical rules or certain nuances, but in CR it's always a sort of anger moment that you have with yourself. You call it a silly mistake or whatever, and you just enter that sort of a spiral of revenge solving. And that's where I think you need to stop. You've got it wrong for a particular reason. Maybe your fundamentals were wrong, or maybe, okay, fine, it was just bad luck. But if there is a fundamental issue, you would only realize it once you've analyzed it thoroughly. And I think that's where it helped a lot more. And I think that's what differed for my preparation before my 660 attempt, and moving on to 760, especially, is the way I analyze those questions. I spent a lot more time doing those analysis.
And I think you also kind of changed the way that you took these questions as well, right? You sort of moved from taking these smaller 5-question quizzes into taking quizzes that had at least 10 questions, where you were able to build that kind of stamina, where you were able to see on a larger scale how you were able to do on accuracy. And I can see that, towards the end, you were taking sectionals, essentially, the entire verbal or the quant sections as part of your test readiness. So that's really great. That review piece really helped. And I think before, when we spoke, you also mentioned the very unique way in which you used the error log to your benefit. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. And I think this was post my second attempt, or the third attempt, sorry, where I scored a 660. I had written to e-GMAT, and I think DJ had replied saying that there are, a couple of metrics that he looks at before telling if someone is test ready. And he said that he's not seen any of those three in the way I have referred to the course. And there was a very right reason, because and you did use a word, the very important word called stamina. I was solving just 4 or 5 questions at a time. And I think that's a lot easier to get those correctly as well, because the concept is fresh in your mind and you're just approaching it, in the same flow anyways. So DJ did recommend, to use the error log. I had seen a lot of reviews over GMAT Club and other forums saying that error log is probably not really useful. You're spending a lot more time instead of, solving questions. And that's where I thought, let me just give it a shot before looking at or giving my feedback out. The way I used the error log was just going through the number of columns itself in the error log. I remember there were around 20 or 30 odd columns within the Excel file that I had downloaded for the error log, and couple of questions that they were asking in the error log was something which I never thought through, right? There was a question on whether I've identified the conclusion correctly, whether I've deferred the conclusion and the premises correctly or not. So even though I did not log every single attempt or every single question in that error log, I did make it a point that I asked these questions to myself while solving the question. And that, I think, differed significantly, at least in terms of the way I was solving the questions fundamentally. And yes, I think that's where the number of those silly errors, if I can say, or the revenge solving, which I can say, went down significantly.
Great. So not only were you reviewing, the way that you're reviewing essentially changed, is what you're telling me. The kind of questions you asked yourself when you reviewed and when you even solved had also been evolved through the error log and what it told you, right?
That's right. That's right. I think an analysis, every time you get the question wrong or even correct, is the major key. I remember when I had written the 760 exam as well, I wanted to come back and download an ESR and analyze them, because that's the habit I'd built all the time, to analyze the questions. So that's the key one.
As someone who did actually download her ESR after her 730 attempt, I completely understand where that review habit makes it that you want to analyze even your most successful attempts. And I think that that's an absolutely wonderful habit to have. Do I recommend that you download your 760 ESR? Not really, but do I absolutely understand where that urge, where that drive is coming from? Yes, and that I applaud. Okay, so verbal, yes, you improved beautifully, right? But another thing that we haven't talked about is that your first 680 you were actually, if I'm not mistaken, at a Q49, right? And what I've understood is that you were just not satisfied with that score. So can you tell us why and how the e-GMAT platform, right, not just the course but also Scholaranium, helped you improve that by 1 point to a Q50, and what that really means?
Sure. I think I was very regularly getting a Q49, even in the mock exams or the GMAT prep mock exams, which I was taking up. Um, it was only during the exam where I'd written the first attempt, like you said, scored a 680, got a Q49, um, and saw the adjacent column right next to the Quant score, and it said a 74th percentile. That's where I realized that that is actually a bad one. I think we all just think that it's 2 points because it's 2 points below the maximum score. 49 is a great one. I think that's where it triggered that it's not. I probably need to improve a lot more. And there is a good difference. It's just a 1 point difference between a Q49 and a Q50, but your overall score just explodes to a whole new level is what I saw. And that's where I think I realized that I need to focus a lot on quants as well. In my first attempt, I don't think I ever had a problem, or I even referred to any quant concept video, concept file, or even bothered solving the questions. I used to just solve it in the mock exams, thought that Q49 is sufficient. As I said, it turned out that I was wrong. So the one thing which I did differently was started writing a couple of sectionals in the Scholaronium, and I think I immediately realized a couple of concepts where I was not really clear. I wouldn't say that I didn't know those or whatsoever, but I wasn't clear with concepts such as modulus, for example. And I think this is the game changer, where if you are 100% clear with the concepts, you can save those or shave off that 1 or 2 minutes that you're spending in just trying to recall the concepts or trying to make sure that you've got the question correctly. So that was one change which I did. And to refer to, I started referring a lot of those concept videos in quant modules as well, especially with respect to modulus and a whole other bunch of topics as well. And I think that's where I saw a significant change in terms of my quant score. Significant change, especially in the percentile, not in the score. I would say a 49 to 50 was not that great a movement, but yes, I could solve the questions a lot quickly simply because Scholaranium had a higher difficulty level as per me compared to the actual GMAT exam. I think one thing which I saw consistently with respect to quant was, and I don't know why that's the case, GMAT prep mocks quant section was slightly easier than the actual exam quants.
Yes.
So I think that was a shocker to me when I saw the first question in the GMAT exam, and I was like, this is supposed to be the last question as per me. I have no clue why they made it that tough. But the problem with tough, I would say, the way I would think of the word tough in GMAT environment is not that the question is impossible to do. It's just that the question is trickier to do. And we fall into these sort of assumptions. Just to give you an example, let's say the question says that, X is a variable which is less than equal to 0. We just assume that it's an integer. It need not be a decimal. And I think people love to call these as silly mistakes or mistakes that they would start avoiding. But I think to get over these sort of silly mistakes was a bigger challenge. And what I used to do was probably write down on a piece of paper. I know it used to take 10-15 extra seconds, but it's always better to get the question right than to solve it quickly and get it wrong. So I remember I used to write down that X can be a decimal as well. X can be an integer as well. It did take a lot more time, but it swelled up the sort of accuracy which I was able to get. So that's something which I changed in my approach, I would say.
And kind of through improving that accuracy, as a consequence, you improved your timing as well, right? Because in your later exams, you were talking about how you had more time for the quant section. So
Exactly.
yeah.
I think in my last attempt, I remember entering the exam center about 2-3 minutes late for quant, but finishing it 5 minutes early as well. So that's the sort of time I had up my hands, because I was solving a lot more harder questions from Scholaranium. They are, I would say, one level higher than GMAT, but that's actually a very good thing for quants, as it turned out.
A very shoot for the moon, reach the stars kind of an approach, really. Yeah. So you entered 3 minutes late, but you had essentially 5 minutes left, which overall, that's anyone having
Yes.
any time left in the GMAT exam is really, really great. But to have that much time and to be at a Q50, which despite it being a 1 point improvement, as you said, makes a big, big difference in terms of your percentile, is really, really great, right?
Yes.
And I think not just the way you approached quant, but the way you approached taking mocks had also evolved as you shifted your overall approach, right? Because the way you took mocks, I'm sure when you were doing when you were scoring a 680 was very different from the way you took mocks leading up to your 760. So how did that change? What changed when you in your mock strategy?
And I think this is something which I would say to everybody, who is consistently scoring high in mocks. I was one of them. I think barring the first ever attempt at a mock, I never scored below a 700 in any of my mocks. And yet I was unable to cross that 700 barrier in the first three attempts. And I think the one change which I did was to write the mock exam as per the actual exam setting. Initially, when I was taking up the mocks, I remember once scoring a 780 as well in e-GMAT Sigma X mock, and 783 times in the GMAT prep mocks as well. And one mistake which I kept doing was, writing it in some sort of a cheat code environment where I stopped or paused the mock as soon as I found the question tough or I was spending a lot more time on it. Went out, refreshed myself, came back in. And I think this is a brunt which I faced in my 660 attempt, wherein I was stuck for about 6 or 7 minutes in the second question of my verbal, and that was enough to spoil the entire exam. And I remember I had, again, one of the 760 strategy sessions which I had taken, which was hosted by Rajat, Harsha, as well as Shraddha, in which Rajat did mention that, a lot of us feel that the first block is really critical. Of course, it's critical. If you're making a mistake, you're going to get the easier questions. But he also mentioned that, there are times where you overthink on a particular question and end up spending a lot more time that you should have. I think that's what I did in my third attempt at 660, where I overthought. And during my 710 attempt, I did make sure that I'm going to run through, not necessarily in a half-a-sad manner, but consciously mark the answer and move on instead of getting stuck for about 3 or anything over 3 minutes for that matter. So that's where I think, again, in the last two attempts, I was very well able to manage time in my verbal, just simply because I didn't sit through for a longer time on each question. And even during my mock exams, I did make it a point that I will, under no circumstance, pause my mock exam. Even if I get a 500 score, it's all right, but at least that approach should be correct.
That's really, really great, right? That you understood that this is the error that I'm making, and that even though it was difficult, you made those changes. And I think some people get into that inertia of, I've been doing this for a long time, and if I continue to do this, somehow this approach will end up working out for me. But what I've seen consistently throughout your success, right, is that you identified, okay, this is not working for me, or it's not working well enough for me to get to a Q50 or a V42. And you took the initiative to change that no matter how difficult it was, which I have to applaud you for that. That's something that's very difficult, but worth the effort, as we can see.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what changed? What did you really do to get from that 710 to that 760? Because it's a 50-point improvement. And if I'm not wrong, you did it in about 20 odd days, right? So
That's right.
what did you do in that time span? How did that improvement come about?
I say the 710 attempt, the 710 attempt was itself, at the back of certain bad practices that I had followed. Again, largely in the actual exam. Yes, I did manage to run through the questions very well, but I do remember whenever an RC came, I was running through that same pace during the RCs as well. And right at the start of this interview, I did mention how important it is to go through the RC at your own pace and start comprehending it. But I think that was the biggest blemish for me in that 710 attempt. And the only difference was for me to, rectify these mistakes. You do download those ESRs, you can see that, your RC was a 60th percentile. And it's very easy to say, hey, your RC was the mess up. It's for you to improve, but only why that mess up did happen in the first place. So I think it was important for me to take those corrective actions, and it was actually really easy to take those corrective actions, because I think at one point I did realize that just one thorough reading is more than sufficient to get through the questions, because the passage is never really tough. I think how many you get 4 passages per attempt, and I think I've taken up 5, so I had 20 passages, and none of the passages were impossible to read through, and none of the passages were impossible to solve. It's just in our minds, probably. So that was change in approach was one thing. I do remember going through a lot of hard level questions, so that I get to that cycle of, solving those a lot more easily. And again, I think in the last attempt, my verbal was done very, very quickly. I saved around 2-3 minutes in verbal as well. A lot of people do say that whenever you're doing really well in verbal, you
Mhm.
will get to know, because they are really hard questions. They are impossible to do. You would probably get stuck at the question stem. And I was scared that I had made a mess up because the questions felt easy for me, right? Easy as in it's not a walk in the park, but easier compared to the ones I'd been doing from Scholaranium.
Mhm.
So I was shocked when I saw V42, but I think I realized immediately that if you have the correct process, you don't need to fall for these sort of feedbacks.
Very, very well said. I can't
Yeah.
even think of an appropriate thing to say back because you've said it spot on, right? And yeah, absolutely. If you are those questions, those V42 level questions will seem easier to you because your ability itself is at a V42. You're not at a V33 level and looking at a V42 question and struggling. You're somewhere in the V40s anyway. So when you see this question, it's something that you have developed, you've built the ability to answer correctly. Test over test over test. So when you see this in the actual exam, might it be a little tricky? Absolutely. But it's
Yeah.
something that you've covered all your bases to answer correctly. So,
Exactly. And I like that word, building the ability, which you have used. I think a lot of us have the habit of just going to the hard questions, satisfying ourselves, getting 3 out of 4 correct. Hey, wow, we have won the game. But I think you got to start slow, make sure that you're confident with it, and then move to the hard ones. I had a tough one, unfortunately, with 5 attempts, but I'm sure someone can do it a lot sooner as well.
so saying that, right? What do you really have to tell other people? Someone who's starting out for the first time in their GMAT prep, someone who's taken the test once, twice, maybe even 4 or 5 times like you, and wants to improve. What would you have to tell them at this moment?
For the ones, to improve, I do have a couple of friends who were with me, and they used to always tell that you have kind of nothing to lose. You might as well just you might just drop in off now,
Mhm.
and sit with the sub 700 score, something at the late 600s. But or you can actually take up the exam, put in some more effort, and get to it. And I think that sort of really helped me. Buying an e-GMAT course alone doesn't guarantee success. I would have paid, I think, $10,000 in that case. But following the process which is suggested to you diligently, I would say, and I did use this, the word revenge solving, trying to stay away from that quantity over quality.
Mhm.
It's something which everybody knows. I just think we don't follow it as much. That does help a lot. And I think it's easier for me to say it in hindsight that it's good that I didn't cross 700 within my first 2 attempts, because I think I would have been very, very satisfied with the 710 within the first 2 attempts had I got it. It's just that through the course, I realized that there is a potential to move to that late 700 odd score. And that's a lot more satisfying, I think, um, than just settling in at an early score. I mean, no disrespect to anyone who's got 710, but I think I'm coming from a sort of overrepresented background as well. So I think I know the limitations of a score at 710.
Yeah, that's true, right? I mean, I think that's also very important to state that you need to know what your background, the strength of your personal profile, and see what score you really need to get to where you're going. And I like that the course helped you realize that you have that potential to go beyond that 710, right? Because like you said, a lot of people might have been very happy, or even you in your earlier in your prep might have been happy to settle for that 710. But you knew going through the course, learning those methods, that 710 was just the beginning. And it was. You went to the 99th percentile, literally somewhere only 1 percentile of people are able to get to, which hats off, right? So I think this is a good space to end this. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Shubham. It was really, really wonderful to have you here. And for everyone who's looking either to start their prep or who's taken an attempt or two and just not happy, there is a path forward, and I think Shubham is the best example and the best person to tell you not to give up. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me here. More importantly, thanks to e-GMAT as well. I think I've said that enough to the whole interview, but thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Shubham. Bye.